I cannot believe what they've cooked here when it comes to combats and leagues. Previously, you would choose a relic that would pretty much dictate which of the three you were going, and it was pretty much one relic. There were other relics that improved combat, but there wasn't this much flexibility. The relic no longer exists. It is now a Combat Mastery skill tree, a completely different system. In this system, you're going to be able to earn 10 points that you can assign through your tiers here, and you can choose multiple styles. You can go heavy into one, and you're going to gain passives on top of that will help for all styles. In terms of getting the points, there's 10 tasks you're going to complete. It's going to start pretty easy, and you can do these in any order, of course, but this is kind of the general order. First one, defeating a giant, for example. Super easy to do. You can pretty much right away, and you're going to unlock a relic right away, which is so cool. It should be fairly easy to get, your first Echo boss, maybe your second. The third could be easy too, but it depends on the regions you choose. Mainly the Varlamore region being the most difficult. That requires you to get through the Colosseum, take out Soul Heretic, and then take out the Echo variant of Soul Heretic. So people who aren't familiar with the Colosseum, you might have to learn that with this if you go with Varlamore. It could make getting that point more difficult for some people. The last one here, defeating Zuck, again, might be your first time in the Inferno. I suspect most people should be able to get 8 points fairly easy, 9 points decently easy, and then 10 points, some people get it and some people won't, but there's so many builds you can work with something like 8 points being enough. Every time you get a new tier, you get a passive that applies to all combat styles. So this first one here, 95% chance to save on weapon charges, ammo, and runes for spells. That is amazing. Defeating a giant not only gets you a tier unlock here, it effectively makes ammo and runes not an issue anymore, even if you don't go that style. This here, tier 2, healing is improved by 20%. Tier 3 is the big one, okay? Probably the biggest one here. Accuracy with all styles increased by 100%. So even your off styles are going to be way more accurate than you're used to seeing in the real game. You might not have all the gear, but this should make up for it. Tier 4, damage reduced by 15%. Tier 5, prayer point gain from all sources increased by 25%. And then last one, attacks with all styles now have 60% prayer penetration. That could be really good for stuff like demonic gorillas, tormented demons, Akka, but not a super important relic in my opinion. So if you don't go at tier 6, don't feel too bad for missing out on that. So we're going to go through each of these trees, and I'm going to talk about some of the main things, main skills, some of the caveats, the identity, and some of the weapons that will work very well at these tiers. So for melee hits have a 25% chance to roll damage twice and take the higher result. That is decent. It's not super strong. I don't know how much exact DPS it might equal to, if it's between 5 and 10, I'm sure. But, it's going to be nice if you would have rolled a 2, but then you also rolled like a 30, that you're going to get a 30 instead. So you're going to overall see less low numbers and more high numbers, but it's 25% of the time, so it's not going to happen like every single hit. Second relic here is where we get part of the identity of the melee tree. There's two major things with the melee tree. This one is echo hits, a 10% chance to generate an echo hit, which is an additional hit spot that deals 50% damage. That, if you think about 10%, 50% of the time, is a 5% DPS increase. So it's actually not a massive increase, and it's only happening 1 every 10 hits. But something with this tree is there's so many things that are a percentage chance, like 1, 2, 3, 4 things here, where if you have a weapon with multiple hit spots, like a dual Makoidals, or if you have a Dragon Dagger or Burning Claws or Scythe with 3 hit spots, that's going to make this a lot more consistent. It's not going to raise the DPS, but it's going to help the consistency. So your melee hits for Scythe have a 75% chance, like at least one of the hit spots, to change the number, take the higher result. Or the echo hits being 30% chance to proc at least one echo hit with a Scythe. That's really good. Dual Mox early on, 20%. It's going to make it more consistent. Moving down the tree, melee attack rate set to 80% rounding down. Big part here is rounding down. This effectively makes all weapons from 5 tick and lower go down 1 tick. So 5 becomes 4, 4 becomes 3, 3 becomes 2. More impactful the faster speed you go, because that is a larger percentage increase. So if you can get a 3-tick weapon to a 2, like a ham joint, but obviously those aren't super strong to use, but early on, maybe like a 4-tick weapon will be pretty good because it'll be a 3-tick. The other weapons that'll be really good at this point are 6-tick weapons because they become 4-tick. So something like a Colossal Blade early, for example, Barrel Chest Anchor, those are all going to become 4 ticks. They're going to be pretty strong 4 tick options for people to use. Tier 4 is the healing relics. For melee, we have a 5% chance to heal for 40% of the damage dealt. So a lot of healing from the 40% perspective, but only a 5% chance of proccing. Overall, that's a 2% total lifesteal, which doesn't seem like much, but in leagues you're hitting so much that it will add up. That being said, I think there are stronger healing relics. If you think about having a dual hit weapon, it can help with some consistency. So dual mox will be like a 10% chance. And then, you know, a scythe will be like a 15% chance. Again, it's not increasing. It's not going to be 40% healing at that point because it's an individual hit spot, but it's going to make it more consistent. And then tier 5 is very interesting. It's all the same for all 3. Melee attack rate set to 50%, rounded down above 5 tick, and rounded up below 4. So this essentially makes 5 tick weapons the best. It makes them 2 tick. And it's actually in contrast to tier 3, which 5 tick is kind of the worst one because it's 5 to 4, which is less of a total increase, and then 6 goes to 4 anyways. This makes 5 the best. It's like kind of flips it on its head. So this is where you're going to start switching to, you know, your scythe or your fang, because those are going to be 2 tick and they're just going to destroy. There's also interesting weapon you can go with if you go Varlamore. This is a 5 tick weapon, the Sunlight Spear. It's decently strong, similar to Fang in stats, maybe less accurate overall. It's got good defense. It's essentially a 2-handed, so it's like you're holding a defender. But it's got an interesting passive here where every hit that you do, which is a 2 tick, it's going to build a stack up to 20. That will not take long to do. And then you have a special attack that uses 7 of those stacks, which is only going to take, I mean, with 2 ticks, it's going to take 14 ticks to get there. Hit every NPC within 3 tiles of the player, and it increases damage based on your prayer as well. So that's going to be a very fun AoE option for melee. I'm very excited for that, honestly. There's another weapon too that I'm very excited for that's going to really help the melee tree, I think, quite a bit. If you go Korend, you can get Nature's Reprisal. This is essentially a salamander, like a beefed up salamander that uses all 3 styles. So if we're focusing on the melee style, it's going to be a stab weapon with 103 strength here, which again, it's kind of like a Fang, to be honest. Less accurate than the last weapon I showed you and Fang, but it can attack from 7 range out. That's incredible. It is also a 5 tick weapon that becomes a 2 tick weapon. That's also incredible for us. This is also going to make stuff like the Inferno possible in melee, because you're going to be able to hit Zuck with this. Or some other bosses you typically wouldn't be able to melee, you can do this instead. Or it might make things a little bit, I don't know, easier. Like maybe you can do Vasa Crystals from a distance, stuff like that. Tier 6 is taking the echo effect and doubling it, and also allowing your echoes to echo on top of that. So overall, that's like a 22.2222 remaining chance of like echoes happening and whatnot. It says up to 8 times in a row, but getting 8 in a row is very unlikely. It's like 1 in like 300,000 hits. When it pops off, it's going to pop off even if you get 3 or 4 echoes. You have something like a scythe, it's 60% chance for at least one of those to generate. Overall, with the melee tree, if you're into kind of RNGing yourself a little bit and trying to get like big damage in from getting echo charges in and seeing a lot of hit slots, this will be the tree for you. Definitely. It does have the drawback of being in melee range, but you can get the Korend weapon to give yourself some melee distance. The range tree is quite literally the opposite in almost every way. Where the melee tree is all about RNG and you know, getting lucky sometimes, the range tree is all about consistency. The first relic here, damage rolls beneath 30% of your max hit are increased by 30%. So this is really, really good, even early, but especially late when combined with some of the other relics here. So if you were to hit a 1 and your max hit was a 30, that would be increased to an 11. If you were to hit a 9 and your max hit is a 30, that'll be increased to 19. So you're never going to see like low numbers provided you hit, which is very, very nice. If you were like Blowpipe spec, for instance, and hit, like that's always going to heal you for a little bit. This next relic, in my opinion, is kind of on the weaker end overall, but the range tree is just so good that it's not a big deal. Each subsequent range attack has its max hit increased by an additional 5%, and it resets after 20. So first would be 0, then 5 for second, 10, 15, 20. So your 5th hit is 20%. You can maybe time some of your hits with it, maybe switch to like heavier weapons if you wanted to or something weird like that. But I feel like that's going to be kind of hard to pay attention to, especially with faster weapons. So it's kind of just happening in the background, and overall is a DPS increase across the board. The third tier, so this is the range being set to 80% rounding down again. This is the strongest one out of the three by far. Range weapons typically are faster, and this gives you access to really fast options really, really early. Particularly a blowpipe, right? A blowpipe would be 2-tick on rapid. This makes it 1-tick on rapid. So that's massive. A 1-tick blowpipe only going 3 points into range is so good. On top of that, there's not just one blowpipe this league. You can go the desert and get the Drygore Blowpipe. This, it doesn't have the same damage strength as the regular blowpipe, but what it does have is a double accuracy roll. So it's going to be kind of like the Fang, where you're going to hit very, very often. On top of that, you got the increased 100% accuracy here. So you are absolutely going to smack at tier 3 with this weapon. 1-tick, pretty much never missing on even really beefy targets. I'm very excited to use this. But even if you don't have this, you can still get the regular blowpipe, of course. And even if you don't have the regular blowpipe, I feel like there's still really good options. There's a lot of 3-tick weapons that become 2-tick weapons. So something like the Addles, for example, from the Moons of Peril, that's going to be a 2-tick weapon early, and that's going to be very, very strong. You can also, if you go Mauritania, do the Echo Boss for the Guardians, Grotesque Guardians, and get the Gloves of the Damned. They're kind of like Barrow's gloves, I believe the same stats. But what happens is it counts as wearing the Amulet of the Damned, and it doubles the effect of all Barrow sets. So that could be fun overall, but I'm thinking about the Carol set here. The Carol's crossbow is a 3-tick. It would be a 2-tick with this relic, and then that would give it a 50% chance to fire an additional hit for 50% damage. So effectively a better version of the melee Echo relic. So that's going to be really, really good option if you don't have like the blowpipe. And again, running with 2-ticks is kind of a lot easier than running around with a 1-tick weapon, which if you move, you lose a lot of DPS. So this is another solid option. Addles, there's so many options you could go with that makes this really strong. And what I really like about this relic is even if you don't go full range, you can get 3 points in range and then go, max on one of the other two and still have like a 1-tick blowpipe, right? Like that's so cool. Tier 4, this in my opinion is the strongest healing relic. Every 5th range hit heals you for 5 hit points. Now, it's actually 6 hit points because you have this increased by 20%. It's just very, very consistent. And because you're attacking at 2-ticks or 1-ticks, you're going to be healing constantly with this. And it's a flat amount no matter what. On top of that, if you're interested in getting Varlamore as your region, if you do the Soul Heretic, you can get access to the Sunlit Bracers. These are good bracers for range, decent for melee, but the big thing here is all healing received is increased by 100%. This is going to apply to all of them here, assuming it works, but I'm just using this to illustrate that this 5 hit points, that is 6 hit points, is going to be doubled 100%. So you're going to get like over 10 hit points every five range hits, which is just nutty in my opinion. I love these. I think I'm going to go for these, definitely. Varlamore is one of my regions. Tier 5 is the same thing. You're getting your range set to 50% and it's rounding down for above tier 5 or tick 5. This is going to make it so that this is where your T-bow starts to come online, right? It's going to be a 2-tick T-bow. Your crossbows come online, 2-tick crossbows. Some people prefer the 2-tick crossbows over the 1-tick blowpipe because of the range and because of the ability to move around without losing damage. But you're going to have access to both, which is really cool. But this is going to bring those online. And overall, obviously, very strong. This next relic, though, whoo, baby. Never miss with range. PVM only. Yeah, I hope so. This is absolutely insane. So, for starters, it kind of devalues the blowpipe from the desert that I mentioned earlier. This is still going to be good tier 3. It's still going to be good if you're going half range. But obviously, once you get here, you're never missing, so it's better to get blowpipe. But not everybody's going to take the Zulrah. So it's still an option, but definitely blowpipe is going to be what you want here. What I'm thinking is just the amount of possibilities to take on bosses with range that you typically wouldn't do, right? With like blowpipe. You could do Soul Heretic with blowpipe. You can do all the Dagonoth Kings with just blowpipe. You could do, like, I'm thinking about Olm, right? Like, I'm assuming that you'll definitely be able to damage the melee hand. I don't know about the mage hand, but hopefully you could damage both, and then you obviously get the head with range. So you can walk into Olm with just range and deal so much damage so quickly, not need to worry about defense reduction, gear switches, nothing, presuming it works there. So this, even if it doesn't work there, this is just the most insane relic. So overall, we talked about the melee tree, right, being about like hitting and having limited range and whatnot. This here is just king of consistency. You'll never miss. On top of never missing too, you're always going to hit above 30% of your max hit. So if you have a T-bow that hits like a 70, you'll never see below like a 20 whatever. So if you love consistency and you want to take on all PVM, no problem. If you don't think you're going to get 10 points, right? If you're going to struggle with some points, range is definitely the way to go. A solid option. Mage, I think, is going to be the least picked one overall. It is got some really cool things going for it, and it's got some downsides I'll talk about. I think this first relic is probably the strongest of the three early game and probably scales pretty well late game. When you roll above 90% of your max hit, the damage is increased by 50%. So that's like early game. If you do Fire Strike, that's going to be what, 12 instead of an 8? That is just so good. And then late game, when you have like a Shadow, think about a Shadow that hits a 70, right? That's going to become 100 plus every time you hit like a 70. That's just absolutely insane. So you're going to see so many hundreds with magic if you get the Shadow. The second tier here is also very strong early. It gets weaker later, but it's even when it gets weaker later, it's at least equal to these other tier 2s here. Magic hit is increased by 5% per tick in between your attacks, up to 40%. So 7 ticks apart will give you 40% damage, but more realistically, you're doing like 5 ticks or 4 ticks apart, so you're getting like 20 or 25% damage. When you start to get speed increases and you're attacking at like 2 ticks, it's still 10% increase. And then factor in like bosses respawning or relocating or whatever the case is where you're not attacking, you're going to get up to 40% during that downtime. And the downtime's not long, obviously, just 7 ticks, right? So this here, these first 2 mage relics, in my opinion, comparing to the other 2, in isolation, are the strongest, right? So that's very interesting because later on it feels like mage is not as strong as something like range, but definitely these 2 in isolation, incredible. The third one here is, again, the 80% attack speed one. This is less relevant for mage. Your standard spellbook, your barrages, they go from 5 tick to 4 tick. Your tridents, your warp scepters go from 4 tick to 3 tick. So that's that. Not as impactful as the range one, definitely, and doesn't have the same value as some of the melee ones with like 6 ticks, for example, early. But, speeding it up is nice. Harm Orb, that would go from 4 to 3, but if you have a harm at this point, you'll probably get tier 5. But if you're going hybrid, then I guess you might stay only here anyways. But it's decent. This healing one for mage is kind of the strongest and weakest healing one. I mean, I don't think it's as strong as the range one, but it has some potential. When you roll above 90% of your max hit with magic, you heal 10% of the damage dealt. 90% of your max hit is going to happen about 10% of the time, right? So it's 10% to heal 10%, which is only like 1% lifesteal. That is half like of the lifesteal that you would get from like melee. Thing is, you're always healing when you hit big. With the melee one, you could proc the heal, but it could have been a low hit and you barely heal. This here, when you hit big, like a Shadow 70, you're going to heal for 7. But you're not just healing for that, right? Because you're increasing your damage. This here scales so good, right? It's going to be a hit for 100, so you're going to heal guaranteed for 10. The healing increase here by 20% is going to be great for that. And of course, like I showed before, these bracelets, when you get that big hit for 100, that's going to heal you for like 20. It's going to be like a shark, right? It's just going to only happen 10% at a time. But I mean, you're attacking with like a Shadow very fast. That's going to be decently often, honestly. This is pretty strong, and it kind of synergizes with the last relic here. Before we get to the last one though, let's see this one, which is magic attack rate set to 50%, rounded down with 5 ticks. So this is going to make your Shadows attack with 2 ticks. So I've talked about Shadow so much. Shadow is very, very, very important for mage. Without the Shadow, your next best options are a little bit more subpar. Now, you do have one unique option here when you get to this tier, which I'll bring this weapon up again. So if we look at this, it's a 5-tick weapon, which is very nice because this will become a 2-tick mage weapon. And this formula here is kind of, it's like the Trident of the Swamp in terms of like the hit you'll expect from it, but it also has 12% mage strength, so you're getting an extra couple max hits there, right? So this is going to be a good option before you get a Shadow, especially if you go Kurend. But even so, Shadow is going to be really, really important to get. So think about that if you're going mage. The other thing about getting a Shadow is you really, really want strong mage gear. So you really have to think about the areas you're taking and the mage strength you're able to acquire. So if you go Kurend, for example, to get the Nature's Reprisal as like a way to a Shadow, you can then do Chambers for Shadow while also getting Ancestral, right? And Augury potentially. The other thing you could think about is stuff like these weapons here from the Dagannoth Kings. If you happen to go Fremennik, 10% mage strength, 5% mage strength, that's 30% for Shadow, right? 15% for Shadow. Even more in TOA if you win Desert, right? But you only have so many options. This last relic here, max hits with magic is increased by 1% for every 100% remaining on the target. Not for their total health, but remaining. So best case scenario, this is a 10% DPS increase for the first part here. Worst case scenario, it's like a 1% or less increase. That being said, I think the second part here is a little bit better and more important. On a successful magic hit, if your target has less hit points than your max hit, you always max hit. So if your max hit is a 70 and they have 70 health, then they go down. There's a couple good things with this. Well, first thing I want to mention is I don't think it works with this increased magic, 50% here. So if your max hit is a 70 and they get to 70 health, you'll hit a 70. I mean, you might invisibly hit a higher number, but it won't matter. It might matter though when it comes to the healing. So the healing, again, 90% of your max hit, you're always max hitting. This means every time you take something out, it's a guaranteed heal for 10% of the hit. It's just a matter of if that overkill DPS you're doing is counting for healing or not. I think it will. So this is going to make it so that you can really, like if you're doing like, I don't know, God Wars Dungeon, they don't have a lot of health. So a couple hits, they get low. And once they're at like 70 health, they're dead. And then, hey, you know what? I'll take the extra, 10 health or whatever, potentially more if you have the bracers, right? So this is going to be good. This could also be really good for stuff like Colosseum, right? When you take out NPCs, you get some good healing in there, right? If you happen to take damage or if you're tanking a lot or whatever the case is. So good synergy there. Very happy with that. Very good for Slayer. Very good for taking out AoE mobs and basically healing any damage you would take. Lastly, with magic, if you didn't want to go that kind of route, you want to go a little bit less conventional, you do have the Devil's Element, which you can get from Thermi. This is going to double the amount of damage you deal with elemental spells. What's interesting about this is if you go full mage, you won't need a harm staff to increase your speed because a harm staff would make it a 4-tick and then this relic would make a 4-tick a 2. A 5-tick is already a 2. So really you could put any staff on. It doesn't really matter. You're going to attack at a 2-tick speed and you'll be doing so much elemental damage, but it's only going to apply to certain targets. And if you're going hybrid, and you want to get maybe 3 points here, this is a way where you can kind of get some elemental weakness included while going another style, but I think that's going to be very niche. You want to see a big number, you want to do a lot of Slayer, and you want to take out bosses and waves and whatnot that have lower HP, magic might be the way you want to go. They completely cooked with this update, honestly. I want to talk about build paths. So I've thought of the different build paths, the ones I think are going to be really popular for certain reasons, the ones that might be a little bit more off meta, the ones that don't necessarily get a tier 6, but this video would be way too long. So if you want to see that, leave a comment below and I'd be happy to create a video on that. Honestly, I can't wait till we can get into the league and start dipping our toes into this combat system.